What if I told you some of history's worst torture was called science? Not dungeon stuff, not cartoon villains, actual educated men. Doctors, scholars, people who truly believed they were helping humanity, which, honestly, is a terrifying sentence all by itself. And the worst part? Some of their subjects were still alive. Yeah, alive. Still breathing while science kept taking notes. And this is not just one horrible story. That would almost be easier, weirdly. No, it is a pattern. A pattern where curiosity, power, and confidence keep mixing together. And somehow, it always gets worse. So let's start simple. Back in ancient Greece, around the 4th century BCE, people began asking huge questions about the world. Questions like, what is everything made of? How does the body work? Why do we die? Light dinner conversation. And for the first time, humans were not just guessing anymore. They wanted proof. They wanted to see things for themselves. And that, right there, is where everything starts getting uncomfortable, because seeing the truth usually means opening something up. There was a physician named Herophilus, smart guy, curious, completely obsessed with understanding the human body, which is where this starts going bad. So he did what any reasonable scientist would do. He went somewhere with more resources, because that phrase never ends well. Alexandria, Egypt, a city overflowing with knowledge, ideas, scrolls, discoveries, basically the Silicon Valley of ancient science, minus the apps. And Herophilus saw exactly what every obsessive mind loves most: an opportunity, a place where almost any question felt answerable. See, studying the human body sounds noble in theory, very educational, very respectable, until you hit one tiny logistical problem. You need bodies, and not just dead ones either, because dead bodies can only tell you so much. If you really want to understand how something works, you need to see it in motion, which is, yes, exactly as bad as it sounds. You can probably see where this is going now, that little scientific itch for proof. It is about to become a nightmare. So Herophilus and his colleague Erasistratus began performing dissections on actual humans, which, okay, is already alarming enough. Except they were not dead, not even close. These dissections were happening on living, fully conscious human beings. Yeah, take a second with that. Fully awake, fully aware, and absolutely unable to do anything about it. And no, these were not volunteers. Nobody signed up for this. Nobody agreed to help science in this way. These were condemned criminals, people handed over by the state, turned from prisoners into experimental material. Instead of a quick execution, they were slowly opened up, layer by layer, while someone calmly observed. Questions like, what does this do? What happens if we cut here? What if we damage this nerve? All answered in real time. It was basically a very real, very horrifying version of what does this button do, except the button was a human body. And the strangest part? They were not even hiding it. Some of these procedures were done in front of an audience, like a public demonstration. Step right up, watch the human body in action, which is not a sentence you ever want to hear. And here's the thing. There was no anesthesia, no numbing, no relief, no mercy. Every single cut was fully felt. Every incision, every movement, the body reacted, the mind understood, and the pain never switched off. Until eventually, the body just couldn't take it anymore. It simply shut down under the weight of it all. But here's where it gets complicated, because the results were actually groundbreaking. Herophilus made major discoveries about the brain, the nervous system, even distinguishing veins from arteries. Which means this worked. That's the part nobody likes to sit with. Because now you're stuck with a very uncomfortable question. What do you do with knowledge built on suffering? And if you're thinking, well, that was ancient history, people didn't know better back then. Yeah, that would be nice. That would be really nice. Because next, we are jumping forward over 2,000 years, and somehow, against all logic, it gets worse. A time with modern science, modern ethics, educated systems, people who absolutely should have known better. And yet, the same pattern shows up again. Calm decisions, controlled environments, and human lives treated like variables. So let's fast forward, not a little, not a few centuries into over 2,000 years into the future. Modern science, modern medicine, modern humanity, everything that is supposed to fix the past. So things should be better now, right? I mean, we learned, we improved, we evolved, right? Yeah, about that. It is 1954. The United States is preparing to test a thermonuclear bomb in the Pacific. The operation has a name, Castle Bravo, which sounds neat, and that is usually a bad sign. This was not just any bomb. This thing was designed to be powerful but controlled, measured, predictable. A clean scientific test. Numbers, calculations, everything carefully planned. Nothing left to chance. Except someone, somewhere, looked at those calculations and said, yeah, this seems fine. It was not fine, not even close. The explosion ended up being 2.5 times stronger than expected, which is not a rounding error. 15 megatons. That is about 1,000 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Just let that sink in for a second, because numbers like that do not really feel real. Now, here is where things start getting uncomfortable again, because the test site was not empty. There were people living nearby, entire communities, families, children. And somewhere in that command chain, someone probably paused. Wait, should we evacuate them? You know, basic human instinct, right? And someone else probably didn't even pause. Just, no. Let's see what happens. Yeah, that's not reassuring at all. Because after the explosion, the fallout didn't ask permission. It spread, quiet, invisible, everywhere at once. 239 people exposed. Not a little. Not manageable. No, severely. Like, this is already going very wrong. And instead of treating them as victims, something shifted. Subtle, but dangerous. The situation became useful. They weren't just people anymore, and not really. They became something else. Something easier to study than to save. Data. Just data. Clean, organized, measurable. And somehow that made it worse. Within days, people started breaking down. Hair falling out, skin reacting. Things that don't just happen naturally. And the scientists? No panic, no urgency, just watching, writing, documenting everything, like this was exactly what they needed. Not because they didn't understand radiation. No, they absolutely did. That's what makes this part worse. Because now, they had something new. A controlled population. Real people, exposed over time. Right in front of them. Long-term exposure. Real-time observation. You know, the kind of data scientists dream about. Just not like this. So instead of stopping it, they turned it into a study, a formal one, structured, named. Project 4.1. Sounds clinical, sounds harmless, like paperwork. It was not harmless. At first they said no long-term effects expected, which, yeah, that did not age well. Years later, things started showing up, quiet at first, then harder to ignore. Women losing pregnancies, children developing differently, bodies reacting in ways no one could stop, and cancers, especially thyroid cancer, rising slowly, steadily, like something that was never going to leave. Now at this point, you might be thinking, okay, terrible accident, right? Bad situation, handled badly, but still an accident. And yeah, that would be comforting. It really would. If all of this was just mistakes. But what if it wasn't always a mistake? What if sometimes This was the plan. Let's go somewhere else. Soviet Union, early 1920s. New government, same old problem. How do you eliminate enemies quietly? No explosions, no witnesses, no noise. Not war, not chaos. Something cleaner, more controlled, more precise. So they built a laboratory, hidden, classified, designed for one purpose only. Poisons. Not just any poisons, perfect ones. Invisible, undetectable, impossible to trace. Basically, if murder had a PhD, quiet, efficient, and scientifically optimized. But here's the problem. To create the perfect poison, theory isn't enough. You need to test it on something real. Not animals, not simulations. Real human bodies. Because that's where the answers actually are. So they used prisoners. People already marked as disposable, already erased in the system. No names, no rights, no way out. Just subjects waiting to be used. The poisons were disguised. Medicine, drinks, something harmless. At least, that's what it looked like. Until it wasn't. Until the body reacted violently, unpredictably, sometimes instantly. Some caused seizures, others stopped the heart immediately. Clean, efficient, exactly what they wanted. And some were slower, much slower. Not dramatic, not loud. Just fading, your body weakening, your strength disappearing, like something inside you just quietly shuts down. This is Unit 731, a place where humans weren't really humans anymore. They had a different name. They called them logs, like wood, like objects, something you use, and then throw away. And once you do that, once you remove the idea that someone is human, everything else becomes easier. They froze limbs, slowly, carefully, watching what happened as the body reacted to the cold. They tested pressure, pushed the human body beyond limits, just to see when it would finally give out. Starvation, dehydration, isolation, not to kill immediately, but to observe the process. And here's the part that really gets you. Some of this wasn't even for war. It wasn't strategy. It wasn't survival. It was curiosity. Just, what happens if we try this? Thousands died, maybe hundreds of thousands. And for a moment, you think, okay, at least there was justice. No, many of them were given immunity because their data was too valuable to lose.